to the extent where I memorize them, inside out, and of course understand all these formula. They had all these formula that one needed to memorize and remember these things. So, so I would literally sit down and rewrite the notes and rewrite the formula over and over and over again just to make sure that I understand them all and remember them all. I know how to derive some of them and all that stuff. So it's a matter of investing the time there.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to In the Know, the show that tries to give Muslim and non-Muslim youths a voice and deals with youth issues. Now, we realise a lot of you might be busy with exams or you have exams coming up and you're probably piled with revision and studying. So we decided to dedicate today's episode to study tips. Earlier on, I went to see Sheikh Usama Al-Atar, an esteemed English lecturer who's quite far in the field of academia. I went to ask him about his personal advice to students for study tips and the Islamic perspective. Usama is originally from the holy city of Karbala. He is well-rounded at the academic level and active at the religious level as well. Sheikh Usama completed his PhD in chemistry at the Simon Fraser University of Vancouver, Canada, and is currently a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Alberta. He also studied the Quran along with its recitation at a young age, and by the age of 14 was reciting the Quran professionally. Sheikh Usama had the unique opportunity of studying under some very well-learned scholars and started to read majalis at various communities worldwide.
What I found really useful sometimes when studying is to rewrite the notes, and especially the parts that need to be memorized. Certain parts, certain courses require memorization. And for that, I would rewrite whatever needs to memorize once, twice, 3 times sometimes even, just to make sure that I have it all memorized. In certain cases, there are formulae that need to be derived. So I'm just make sure that I understand the derivation and how I get to it. And in some cases there are reactions that need to be figured out, and that's mostly in chemistry, which is my degree, and that's where a person needs to understand how to perform these reactions, remember what compound will do what to what element, or so on and so forth, and how do you get to that reaction going. So this is my personal experience. Sometimes you just need to sit down and rewrite and write and write and write until you make sure that you have it all grasped.
Do we have any ahadith or recommended du'as that we can recite when it comes to retaining knowledge or memorizing things and studying?
There is a quick du'a that one can recite after salat, the wajib salat, and it is found in Mafatihul Jinan as well. It starts as Subhana man la ya'tadi ala ahli mamlakatih, Subhana Ra'ufur Rahim, Allahumma ij'alli fi qalbi nuran wa basara, وفهما وعلما إنك على كل شيء قدير. So it's a short dua, yet in the ahadith, even if you read in Mafatih al-Jinan, it says this helps the memorization. Yeah. So that does exist, yes.
Are there any methods of revision or studying that you would personally recommend to students to use?
For studying, personally, of course, it varies from one individual to another individual. There are those individuals who are gifted, and mashallah, they can remember things from the first hand and the second time. Generally, though, we tell students to read things at least 3 times. So you study the topic the first time, and then you review it a second time, and then on the eve of the exam is when you just do a final review. And usually what ends up happening is people study the first time on the eve of the exam, and then it's difficult to retain all that knowledge, and that's when they fall under pressure of retaining the whole knowledge. So, and that's when sometimes what the students come to us, the night of the exam or the day or 2 before the exam, and they want us basically miraculously make them understand the whole subject matter within a matter of a day or 2, and it's usually not easy and feasible to do that.
Obviously,
Ideal revision methods vary from person to person, but there are a few basic tips that apply to pretty much everyone with exams. The first one would probably be to remember that revision is supposed to be a review of stuff we've already learned, not learning new stuff the night before the exam. I know it sounds very cliche, but don't leave things for the last minute. A lot of us tend to overestimate our abilities and underestimate the amount of work that we need to get through, and it doesn't really end well usually. So make sure you work throughout the year so that come revision time, you're actually revising and not learning new material. One of the common problems that a lot of students face during exam time is a bunch of health problems. For example, a lot of students might study in the night instead of the day, or both, and they might lose sleep, or a lot of students get stressed and they might stop eating normally and have an unhealthy diet in the exam period. So what advice would you give students to avoid these health problems?
It's very important for students to relax during exam period, and I know it's easier said than done, but that also is a reflection on how much preparation the student has done during the school year. Of course, when someone leaves everything to the last minute, then there'll be more stress, and an individual might think that if I pull an all-nighter, then it would help me understand, the subject matter better and finish studying it. In fact, there are numerous research literature out there where it shows that when a person does not sleep enough and rest enough, then their ability to think and process information would slow down tremendously. In fact, it is almost as dangerous as in one study they related it to drinking alcohol, almost to that level. Now, of course, they pushed it to the extreme where they did a 24-hour sleep deprivation, which some students do so because they take all these energy drinks. And unfortunately, what happens then is that they might go into an exam and they just completely blank out. And we don't want that to happen. So it's better for the student to actually study the amount that he or she can study, but then rest. So at least they will be able to answer these questions that they've managed to study for. Again, we go back and tell our students that it's a matter of time management and being able to sit down and read the subject matter beforehand.
A very important aspect to take care of in study leave is our health when it comes to eating, sleeping and exercise. So we put together a list of top 10 health tips for you. Here they are now.
Number 1. Stop your revision a good hour before you want to sleep so that your brain has time to switch off and unwind. Number 2. Try and stay active and do some exercise. It's a great way to reduce stress and to tire you out before you go to bed. Number 3. Try and avoid having heavy meals too close to sleeping, or your body won't be able to relax because it will still be digesting the food you've eaten. Number 4. Avoid caffeinated drinks such as tea, coffee or Coca-Cola after 6 p.m. Number 5. Have a milky drink. It contains the chemical called tryptophan, which is an essential component of the body's sleep mechanism. Number 6. Sleep in complete darkness or as close to it as you can. That way there are less distractions to your eyes. Number 7. Wear socks to bed. Due to the fact that feet have the poorest circulation in the body, they can often feel cold when you get to bed. And number 8, try and think about something mundane. That's why we're told to count sheep, because it's boring. That way you'll stop worrying about your work. Number 9, if you really can't go to sleep, don't panic, it won't help. Get up and do something monotonous, like filing some notes or folding clothes. And finally, number 10, if you really can't sleep the night before an exam, don't worry. The odd night without sleep won't be devastating because the adrenaline will see you through.
One of the main problems that a lot of students face when they're studying is being motivated to study. Sometimes it might not be enough to think, oh, well, if I study, I'll get a good grade at the end of it. So how can students find their motivation to study?
One thing important, I think, is for people to do what they like to do. I understand sometimes there might be some pressure on choosing a particular subjects that might be more liked by the society than others. But some individuals may not really enjoy these subjects as often, and hence what is better to do is for someone to take classes in something he or she likes. When someone does that, then it makes them study because they like to, not because they have to. There's a huge difference there. That's one thing. The second thing is, of course, to realize that the Prophet ﷺ and Ahlul Bayt ﷺ have put so much emphasis on knowledge that if a person can just stop for a second and think that by me doing this, I'm actually doing the ibadah that Rasulullah has informed me to do, and Ahlul Bayt have told us to do. The many ahadith, like seek knowledge from the cradle to the grave. And the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, where he says that فَضْلُ الْعَالِمِ عَلَى الْعَابِدِ كَفَضْلِي عَلى أَدْنَاكُمْ. You know, the difference between a alim, a scholar, and a worshipper is like the difference between you and myself, you know, the status of myself versus you guys. So we see, if a person puts that in the back of his mind or her mind, that, you know what, I will do this because one day I can serve my society with this, then it kind of still gives this individual the booster that, you know what, let me do this, and I will try to get through it, and I will try to accomplish this. I'll just mention this one story here. There was an alim, you know, who at the age of 40, he decided to go to Hawza and study to become an alim. He was a businessman. You know, so at the age of 40, he goes to class and he sits with all these youth, you know, young people studying, you know, from, let's say, first year. And the teacher started teaching. Now, at the age of 40, this individual had a tough time memorizing everything the teacher was saying. So he went home and he started to memorize. He came the next day and he did not get it. So he felt so bad. He invested so much time in this, and then he says, it's not going to work out. So he decided to quit. He got embarrassed and decided to quit. He went out into a place where he sat, and he saw there's a rock, and there is water that was dripping onto the rock. And you know, as the water drips onto the rock, what happens? It starts creating a dent. And so he saw the dent being formed into the rock, and he said, my mind is not worse than the rock. I'll be able to do this. So he goes back and he studies again, and guess what? He becomes one of the grand maraja, and he writes a book that is still, you know, used in Hawza and taught in Hawza as well. So this is the thing that one individual, when he hears or she hears such stories, and one thinks that, you know what, there is a goal to be achieved there. So let me go and achieve it. There are difficulties on the way, but, you know, we're not like a rock. So we're better than the rock. So
a lot of parents have the mindset that when it comes to exam time, it should be kind of study, and the students should kind of give up their extracurricular activities like sports or other hobbies. Is that a wise thing to do, or do you think activities like that could act as an outlet for their stress?
Physical activity, sports for example, has been shown to actually reduce stress. There are numerous, again, research data that's been done on that issue here. And the whole idea of circulating the blood, you know, increasing the circulation of the blood within the system, that actually enhances the system. Not only does it enhance the system, the individual feels fresh, the immune system gets a boost, so it kind of makes an individual relax, you know. So it's recommended, if the person can manage the time, to actually do some physical activity that will help them as well.
Another thing that a lot of people complain about during exam time is distractions. Some of us try and convince ourselves that we can revise while we're on Facebook or Twitter or BBMing a friend, and this goes for sisters as well. We can't. So a good way to get rid of distractions is to turn them into motivations. For example, I could tell myself that if I revise for an hour, I get to tweet about my exam miseries for 15 minutes. Another thing to remember is that if you're going to revise with friends, make sure they're not the type that you get carried away in a conversation. One of the main things that I've noticed to affect how well students do in exams is time management, both in the exam and before during the year. So what advice would you give to students so that they can manage their time well?
That's a really an excellent question. To be honest with you, of course it varies from one individual to another individual, but in many cases, some people think that it is best for me to finish my degree quickly and get out of there. And so what they end up doing is they start taking 5, 6 courses per semester. And sometimes that puts a lot of pressure on them. So it is better sometimes for an individual just to take it a little bit easy. You know, cut down on the course load to the minimum requirement, for example, to stay as a full-time student, because there are certain criteria by different universities as being the full-time or part-time students. Nonetheless, so even if you have to go down to 3 classes, but if it gives you enough time to study well and do well into these classes, then take your time through them as opposed to rushing through your degree and not doing very well. So the whole idea of time management, I mean, this issue is discussed not only at the academic level, this issue is discussed at a professional level. People who are successful are those who have time and who can manage their time. You know, there's an interesting saying that says, you know, a busy man has time for everything. That's why he's busy. Yeah. You know, it's the ability to manage the time, which is important for the individual to discover. And like I said, it varies from one individual to another. So here, my advice to students is to figure out their own ability. How much can they handle per semester? And take that load so that they can study well in advance before doing the test and the examination. Go to the examination when they're relaxed. Because if they're stressed throughout the exam, again, it's a matter of rushing, and that's that will increase the chances of error. So it's best for them to relax, study the subject matter well, and then when they go to the exam, one should just focus. Read the question. I know it's like a cliche, but read the questions. You know, in many cases, I have students who answer a different question from what's being asked. And it's a matter of just studying the subject matter once, twice, 3 times until you get a good grasp of it. You go in there, relax, read the question, answer it well, and then leave the rest up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
One final piece of advice that I got a lot and that I'd want to give to other students with exams coming up is not to neglect past paper practice. This is because we might know all the material in the textbook, but it doesn't mean that we can apply the knowledge to the scenarios that we get in exam questions. So my personal advice would be that after you've covered all the exam material, go through the past papers one by one, and after each one, review the things that you got wrong and hopefully get them right in the next one. What advice would you give to students for when they're actually in the exam? I mean, from experience, I can say that it's very easy to get nervous or to run out of time, and all these problems just happen during the exam instead of before or after. So what tips would you give students for in the exam?
Personally, I found that, and this is just a personal opinion here, I found that if you are prepared for the exam, nervousness is something that is sometimes natural. You know, you're a little bit stressed. There is that, you know, you don't know what's out in the exam. So that's natural. But as you sit down really and you've studied, you've done your background, you've done your homework, and you're there, you start kind of, as you go through the first question, the second question, then you start, you know, feeling a little bit better and better. Leave the tough questions to the last if you can answer them. It's better to answer everything you know first and then come back to the tough questions. And try to think about the idea of the whole exam. So what some people do is they actually flip through the whole exam and see what can they answer. So they they do this very quickly. And so they figure out what questions they will be able to answer first. So they devise a plan. You know, and it varies from one individual to another. I don't do this myself. I go through it page by page. Sometimes I would flip to the tough questions and see what kind of questions there are, so that I would figure out which one I will address first. But generally speaking, if one devises a plan, then there's no problem. And if you run out of time, if you have done your homework and if you've done things well, don't worry about running out of time. Because even if you run out of time, it means you're not the only one running out of time. And I've had classes myself where I ran out of time, but it appeared that many other people also ran out of time. So the instructor had devised an exam that was a bit too long. So no need to worry there. And of course that was taken in consideration when the exam was being marked. And we do the same thing when we give exams as well. If we find a lot of students are not being able to finish it, it means the exam was a bit too long. So we try to take that into consideration, and most universities do so.
So Sheikh Usama covered most, if not all, aspects of what to take care of during the exam period, from revision tips to health tips to what to be like in the exam. So we hope you found that beneficial, and we wish you the best of luck for your exams. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.
لكن اليوم في يوم القيامة وباخذها بالدنيا وبالآخرة. لكن وقولي له الخليفة، وقولي له حمد، وقولي له ربي يحرق قلبه على أولاده. أنا من أنصار المنتظر، أنا من أنصار المنتظر. تحية لأم الوطن.
ولدها ما مات، احنا كلنا اولاده.
قولي له خليفه، وهذه رساله له ولحمد الى حد ما لا ياخذ بعد عمري ولا ياخذ قلبي، راح ادعى عليه ليله نهاره، واقسم بالله العلي العظيم ما اخليه يهتني في نوم ولا في قعده ولا في اكل ولا في شرب، ويعلم ان احنا من انصار المنتظر، احنا من انصار المهدي بن الحسن، وشايلين من الحكم، وشايلين من الحكم.